So his Yorta was on the 4th day of Av, and he was, when he passed away in 1994, he was 89 years old. He was born in Europe, and in near Lomza Geberna Lomza Geberna, and he came to this country as a small child, probably 3 or 4 years old, and he came to Boston, and he was raised in Boston. He was a very jovial person, very jovial, very good-natured person. Urabi Mabrios, he was somebody who was really mixed in well with other people. He got along very well with other people. He was a salesman for most of his life, in one way or the other, a peddler or salesman, and he really excelled in that because he liked people. And he was a man who always wanted to be observant, and he became observant, very attached to Judaism, very attached to family, especially his wife's family. He was very attached to them. And he was in a circle in Boston where they were establishing the day school by Maimonides. His brother-in-law, Alter Abelo, was very much involved with that. He was actually Rabbi Soloveitchik's Karusa, his learning partner in Boston. So my father-in-law really felt part of that group, and he was very devoted to Judaism and to his family. And he had a tremendous impression, he made a tremendous impression upon his family and upon his children, his 2 daughters, his sons-in-law, and his grandchildren, very close to everybody. So, and he, together with my mother-in-law, went against the tide of the time. The tide of the time was to not to be too attached to Judaism, but to become Americanized. And they chose to belong to an Orthodox shul, to adopt an Orthodox lifestyle, to be part of the Orthodox community wherever they lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, before that in Dorchester. And so he was a man who I believe was a modest man. He wasn't a millionaire. But if you would ask him, are you comfortable? He'd say, I'm making a living. He would say that. He was a man of a very fine sense of humor. So, and really one of the mainstays of the family. So this is in his memory. And he died, as I said, in 1994 on the 4th day of Av. And this is also in memory of my father, Jack Radinsky, whose name was Yitzchak Ben Zion. You might say, how did you get Jack and Yitzchak? Well, he was named by his 2nd grade teacher. There were too many Isaacals in the class. So they decided he's going to be named by that teacher. So she named him Jack, and that stuck. He came to the United States. He was born in Europe in 1911, actually on Tisha B'Av. He was born on Tisha B'Av 1911. And he came to Seattle because during the First World War, you could not travel across the Atlantic, but you could travel across the Pacific. Here are the handouts right here, handout. You could travel across the Pacific. You want to get a handout here too. So he came to this country as 5 years old, 1916. They came directly from Russia by way of Siberia, Manchuria, Korea, Japan to Seattle. A very big journey. And he was raised in Seattle, and he too was a man who went against the tide. When all of his friends were, his intellectual friends at the University of Washington were becoming communists and socialists, he decided he wasn't going to be a communist or so. He was going to investigate Judaism, and he became very attached to the Jewish religion. And he became, He was at one time the president of the Seattle Talmud Torah, which became the day school. At that time was an afternoon Hebrew school. He was very active in the Bikra Shul, which was the Orthodox Ashkenazic shul in Seattle. And he believed in Judaism, as Judaism was the, as he would call it, it was the dye that would, even though you needed just a little bit of it, it would completely revolutionize the world. Very strong belief in that hashkafa, in that, and he and his father, they were in the junk business. He didn't want to be in the junk business. He was actually a graduate of the University of Washington, Phi Beta Kappa in history and in English. He wanted to be a professor, but that was in 1932. 1932, there were no jobs, as you know, no jobs in 32. Worse, much worse than it is today. So his father was in the junk business, so he went into the junk business, and he stayed there for 30 years. And even though he didn't particularly like it, but he was in the junk business as well. That's, you know, today it's called recycling engineer, right? That's the first recycler. So he again went against the tide, and he and his father decided they would close their business on Shabbos. And that was a tremendous turning point in his life. From then on, they went to shul every Shabbos, and they were very involved with the Jewish community. As I mentioned, he was president of the Talmud Torah, he was president of the Men's Club of his shul, very active on the board of the synagogue. So he died on the 24th of Av, which was in 1997 at the age of 86. So this shiur then is given in their memory. So I decided that I would give a shiur in between their Yortzeit dates. One the 4th of Av and one the 24th of Av. So that's why we decided to do this. I've been doing this since my father-in-law passed away. I was doing it in Charleston every year from 1995 until the present. So that's how many years we've been doing this shiur. Normally this is taped, but you know, there are no more tapes. It's obsolete, no more tape recorders. So my daughter Shoshi is, hopefully has it on the iPad. So we'll see how that comes out. That's very good. So I'd like to thank my daughter Shoshi too for typing up the insert. The insert is an actual translation of Moshe Feinstein's Shiur. So if you take right now you would take the packet, and I said this is part 2 of what we did on Shavuos. And the question is, so I put it in this way: the obligation to study Torah and have an occupation so that one can be economically independent. Or there is another way of putting it: should a student of Torah take money from charity in order to devote himself full-time to the study of Torah? So that's the question. Now that question was asked of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein, who was the preeminent posek, decisor of Jewish law in America, for the Orthodox community of America. At least from, let's say, he within a certain spectrum of orthodoxy. In other words, even people from Yeshiva University would ask him questions. He was a cousin of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And when I was at Yeshiva, I used to see him come up to the Yeshiva to consult with Rabbi Soloveitchik. And he had a yeshiva at the Lower East Side called Tiferes Yerushalayim.